Hi, welcome to Miss Rose's Story Time. We are reading The Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Speare. And we are going to read the rest of 16 and hopefully all of 17. I had too much storage on my phone before and I had to take care of that so it could be able to do full lengths of our readings. So please turn with me to page 178 and I hope everyone is doing well. Okay, we left off where Theseus said that Jesus wanted us to love our enemies. And then she says, then why does he say that we must love our enemies? He's talking to men. A girl can't understand such things. He said it rudely and too loudly, because Theseus' words had come close to his own secret doubts. So loudly that two passerbyers turned to stare at them, and Thesia lowered her head and hurried her steps. When she spoke again, she changed the subject. This thing that Joel is doing, is it dangerous? I don't quite understand it. Why does Rosh want those names? I don't think it's dangerous, he told her, not quite truthfully. Joel thinks fast. Don't worry about him. The past part of her question he did not answer. He did not want to admit that he could not see why Rosh wanted the names. Thesia was too willing to accept his assurance, and at once she was confident again. They left the storehouses behind them, passed through the wall of Capernaum, taking special care to greet the sentries, and took the broad road that led north into the hills. All at once, Daniel's muscles tensed. He had seen just ahead two figures in the familiar metal helmets. Two soldiers rested beside the road, their heavy packs in the dust. One of them sat on the stone wall, his spear leaning beside him. The other was adjusting the strap of his sandal, but he glanced up now, and Daniel saw that it was too late even to consider turning back. They're sure to speak to us, he cautioned Thesia under his breath. What if they do? She asked. That's what I came for, to be seen. And then, all the same, you let me do the talking. The two soldiers watched their approach with interest. The gods have done us a favor after all, one of them said. Didn't I predict it? It's more than you deserve, said the other. But who's to question the gods? Here, boy. With a snap of his finger, he indicated the two packs. A quick upward jerk of his elbow made his order clear. Black anger rose in Daniel. He knew well enough the law that allowed the Roman to command that a Jew carry his burden for 1 mile. But the man didn't live who could make him shoulder a Roman pack. He looked squarely at the soldier. Then he spat deliberately. The blow across his mouth came instantly and staggeringly, but he did not lower his head. The second soldier got to his feet easily, carelessly, his eyes watchful. There was a stifled gasp. Then Thesia very quickly stepped forward and lifted one of the packs. It was heavier than she expected, and she paused a second, then made another try and hoisted it awkwardly to her shoulders. The soldiers waited. Daniel stood in helpless fury. Then, for the first time in his life, he bent his neck to the Roman yoke and picked up the second pack. He wanted to weep for shame. The blood pounded in his temples. He did not know which he hated more, the two soldiers or the girl who walked beside him, who had tricked him into this humiliation. He looked at her from the corner of his eye. She was walking at fair pace, only a slight stagger betraying the effort. Let her stumble. Let her fall. and see if he'd care. In a moment, he looked sideways again. He saw the drops of moisture that clung to her forehead and trickled down her chin. Suddenly, shame for her flooded over his own. Thacia. Put it down, he muttered, shifting closer to her. I'll take mine on and come back for it. Nothing of the kind, she panted. Keep quiet. Don't talk. The two soldiers ambled behind them, chatting good-naturedly to each other, as though the two pack-bearers were mules. Finally, they reached the milestone, but rights the soldiers could have made them go on, since they had taken their burdens well within the limits of the last stone. But Thacia's pace had become irksome, and it was obvious that, though willing, she could do no better. So the owner of her pack shouldered it himself, and less willingly the other let Daniel off also, with a parting blow on the ear for his slowness. They strode ahead along the road, and Thacia sank down on the grass, rubbing her shoulder. Are you all right? Daniel asked finally, not looking at her. No thanks to you. What possessed you, Daniel? Daniel scowled down at the road. The very sight of them makes me lose my head, filthy foreigners. If you hadn't been with me, you'd have lost your silly head for good. How would that serve your country? All right, he burst out. I made a fool of myself. Do you want me to go back now? Certainly not. She sprang to her feet. I want to see Leah. They went on, Daniel keeping his eyes on the road ahead, but presently stealing a furtive look at the girl beside him. Daniel discovered that she was looking directly at him. I might as well be honest, Daniel, she said unexpectedly. Back there, I was proud of you. Scared to death, but proud too. If I were a boy, I hoped I'd have the courage. The frank words took Daniel by surprise. He could feel the pleasure of them spreading warm as wine along his veins. He had never had much praise in his life. He didn't know what to make of it. As they climbed the first rise from the plain, a breeze stirred their hot faces. On every side the land stretched, brown and parched under the summer sun. Here and there, a solitary thresher still moved in the field, tossing the grain in great forkfuls into the air, letting the breeze catch the chaff while the heavy grain fell back to the ground. Presently they reached the village. Outside his own door, Daniel knocked and called out, and presently the bolt inside was quickly drawn back. As Daniel pushed open the door, Thacia stood back. I have brought a friend of yours with me, Daniel announced. Leah, from the corner where she had retreated at the first glimpse of an unfamiliar figure, stared out into the road. Then her face lit. Thacia, she cried, why are you dressed in Joel's clothes? Thacia came into the room laughing and pushing back the hot turban with relief. It's lucky everyone doesn't have your sharp eyes, she said. You won't give me away, will you? It's a sort of a game we're playing. Leah came forward slowly. Daniel never plays games, she said soberly. What a pity, said Thacia lightly. Joel and I pretend all sorts of things, but I'll tell you a secret. Your brother does know how to smile. Quite nicely, actually. He doesn't always hide behind that fearful scowl. Unexpectedly, Leah giggled, and then both girls were laughing. Scowling more fiercely than ever, Daniel stamped into his shop, but he left the door open behind him. In Thacia's light-hearted presence, Leah was a different girl altogether. As he worked, Daniel caught between the hissing of the forge and the blows of his hammer the sound of their voices, and over again Leah's soft laughter. When he crossed the room for a tool, he could see them. The two heads, dark and fair, bent over a bit of sewing. He found a good many excuses for walking across the shop that morning. At noon At noon they ate their meal together. Leah spread out with pride the hard bread and the olives and the inferior dates, not knowing how meager the fare really was. With every bite, Daniel remembered the fine white cloth, the damask couches, the wine in alabaster cups, but Thasia seemed to have forgotten. What was there about her, he wondered, a sort of naturalness that made her seem without the slightest effort to belong, no matter where she happened to be, on the mountain, in the luxury of her own home, among the fishing boats. Her gaiety touched with a special grace everything around her. Leah had begun to clear the dishes when some sound distracted her. Daniel, leaning back on his elbows, only half awake in the heavy heat, caught first the look on his sister's face. She was staring through the open door of the shop, and a deep flush was rising slowly from her throat to her pale temples. Daniel sat up. Then he caught the flash of sunlight on a helmet. The pleasure of the moment exploded like a bubble. In an instant he was on his feet and had flung himself into the shop and slammed the door shut behind him. He had thought he had seen the last of the blonde Roman. What had brought the man back? Curse him, too, for choosing to bring his work in the heat of the day, in the black humor. He blew up the fire. When the shadows began to lengthen in the little room, they all knew with regret that the visit must end. Before they set out for the city, Daniel took Thasia into his shop. "You have brought so many gifts to Leah," he said, trying to choose his words carefully. "Would you let me give one to you?" He reached into a deep niche in the wall and drew out a small object wrapped in a fragment of Leah's blue cloth. Awkwardly, he laid in Thasia's hand a little brooch. "I made it with a bit of scrap," he said. Thasia stood looking down at it. "A bronze bow," she whispered. "Do you remember? It was you who thought of it that night, that the bronze bow might mean some impossible thing, the thing we could not do alone. I never forgot it. I don't know how to say it, but it came to stand for everything we are working for our oath, for the kingdom." He had never seen Thasia before when she could not speak. He would remember as long as he lived the look that sprang into her eyes and was quickly hidden as she bent her head. Then his words came hurrying out. "To think that you made it," she exclaimed, her voice shaky. "Why, you ought to be a silversmith, Daniel. You shouldn't be working with these great chunks of iron." "I'd like to try," he confessed. "Perhaps someday when we are at peace." It was the first time he had ever voiced an ambition, even to himself. They set out together along the road, Thasia with the turban snugly about her head once more. "Every time I come, Leah has changed," she told him. "It's like watching a flower opening very slowly from week to week. I hardly wait to see how it has opened since I saw her last." "It's due to you, Daniel told her humbly. "She has never had a friend before. After you leave, I see her trying to do things the way you do them." Thasia smiled at him. "Little things," she said. "Her hair and the way she folds her veil. That's not what I mean." "She does almost all the work in the house now," he went on, "but there are days when she goes back." He was grateful for a chance to speak of this to someone. "Days when she doesn't pay any attention. It's hard for me to have patience enough." Thasia smiled again. "No one would ever take you for a patient man," she said. But do you think Joel and I do not know that what you have done for Leah? Daniel's gratitude went out to her. He would like to think he had done something to make up for those years. She is so lovely, Thacia went on thoughtfully. I can't believe there are really any demons in her. Have you ever asked a physician? The one in the village said there was no cure for her. Once there was a man traveling through the country who had magic power to heal, and my grandmother paid him to look at Leah. He could not do anything either. He said that the demons that make a person afraid are the hardest to cast out. He said something queer. Leah was only a child, but he said that she did not want to be made well. Thacia was silent for a moment. I have heard Jesus say something like that when people ask him to cure them. Once there was a lame man on a litter. Jesus bent over him and looked right into his face and asked him, "Do you want to be made whole? Or do you want to be whole?" It seemed such a queer question. Why would anyone want to stay crippled? Daniel hesitated. This was something he had thought about. Walking alone on the dark, silent road from Bethsaida, he was not sure of his own thoughts. Haven't you ever wondered, he attempted, what good is it for them to be healed, those people that Jesus cures? They're happy at first, but what happens to them after that? What does a blind man think when he has wanted for years to see and then looks at his wife in rags and his children covered with sores? The lame man who saw, is he grateful now? Is it worth to get on his feet and spend the rest of his life dragging burdens like a mule? I never thought of it that way, said Thacia, her eyes clouding. Is that why? Do you think that is so many of them aren't cured? The thought was troubling to them both. They walked on in uncertain silence. Then Thacia's naturally happy spirits reasserted themselves. Have you thought, Daniel, of taking Leah to Jesus? Yes, I've thought of it, but I don't see how I could get her to Capron without frightening her to death. She asked once if Jesus would ever come to our village, but I don't suppose she would really have the courage. When he comes, if she will not go to him, then you must ask him to come to your house with you. He often goes with people you know. To the centurion's house or to some rich man's? Do you really think that would make the slightest difference to Jesus? No, I guess it wouldn't, but somehow I wonder. It's the same as the lame man. It's not much of a world, is it? Is it worth trying to bring Leah back into it? They just stood still in the road. Yes, she cried, and Daniel was astounded to see that tears had sprung into her eyes. Oh, Daniel, yes, if only I could make you see somehow that it is. All this, she exclaimed, the sweep of her arm, including the deepening blue of the sky, the shining lake in the distance, the snow-covered mountain far out to the north. So much. You must look at it all, Daniel, not just at the unhappy things. Suddenly she reached out and touched his hand. Look, she whispered. He lifted his head and followed her gaze. Overhead, barely discernible against the blue of the sky, a long gray shadow hung suspended. Cranes, hundreds of them, were passing in the great phalanx. They wheeled and caught the sun, flashing light from the banks of white feathers, with the shimmering lake, the snow on the mountains. Motionless, the two watched till the line slowly melted into the distant air. Thacia let out her breath. How beautiful, she sighed. It is beautiful just to be alive in Galilee. Daniel looked down at her. Her head was still thrown back, her lips parted. He could see the pulse beating under the smooth ivory skin, and somehow the line of her throat was one with the long, slow arc of the birds in flight. She was aware all at once of his look, and then that their hands were joined. Red surged up into the smooth cheeks, and she drew her hand away. For a moment neither of them moved, and then they both began to hurry, almost to run. At the junction of the road they passed two more Roman sentries, but this time the men did not speak or even take notice of two dusty boys. For once Daniel felt almost grateful to a Roman. Tonight he could not have borne to watch Thesia shoulder a pack. So that's the end of chapter 16. Let's move on to chapter 17, page 188. This time the villagers said, as Daniel halted the blows of his hammer, "Rosh has gone too far." "How do you know it was Rosh?" Daniel inquired, keeping his eyes on the axe he was mending. "Is there any other man in Galilee who dared such a thing? 5 of the wealthiest houses in the city robbed last night. But how would he find out? That's what I can't see. How would he know of there on the mountain that Matthias was giving a banquet? Or which men would have taken half their slaves to make a showing? None of the rest of us even knew the treacherous was coming. Then how can you think it was Rosh?" "I don't have to think. The legionaries found out. Rosh might have got away with it if he'd been satisfied with the loot from the houses. But no, he had to make a night of it." Daniel started. Was there more to the story that had not yet reached him? Hand on the bellows, he waited. They tried the house of the centurion himself. He might have known the centurion wouldn't leave his house unguarded. Most likely the centurions got careless when they found... Most likely the cutthroats got careless when they found the other houses such easy picking. 2 of them were captured. Both escaped convicts anyway, they say. One died as soon as they started to question him, but the other told before they finally made an end of him. Which, Daniel wondered sickly, which of the men he had lived with side by side in the cave? I say, they deserved what they got. Nothing but a pack of thieves up there. For all the fine talk we used to hear, not for a moment could Daniel let such a statement pass in his shop. "Rosh is no bandit," he said. "When he robs, it is for a good purpose." "So I've heard. Rob the rich to feed the poor. I'll be glad to see the poor that gets 1 penny of what he took last night. There may be more important needs," said Daniel, "like filling his own stomach. We'll see if he's satisfied now. We'll see if he lets our crops alone. I'll believe you when we can trust our sheep on the mountain." Daniel started up the bellows and cut off the rest of the man's complaint. This was the 3rd man since morning who had brought the news that had slithered out from the city like a swarm of snakes to every village round about. Some men praised Rosh's daring, elated to see the rich men defrauded, but more, like this man, were indignant. At the first news, Daniel's spirits had soared. Then on the heels of rejoicing had come doubt. Now at the end of the day he felt dull and let down. This then had been the reason for Joel's enterprise? A wholesale looting of the rich men's houses? Somehow both boys had expected something more noble, more worthy of the cause. What did Joel think of it? Was it worth the hours lost from his study and the danger? No question what Joel thought. That night, the meeting in the watchtower was jubilant. Bit by bit, the boys from the city had garnered every crumb of news to relate to the village boys. Joel was a hero twice over. Not only had he furnished all the information that had made the raid possible, he had even returned this morning to the very doors of the robbed houses to listen to the full story from the unsuspecting kitchen slaves. Excuse me. I'm going to keep at it, he boasted. It would be a shame to give up such an opening. I've got a special order from the centurion's head steward. 24 fish every second and fourth day of the week. There's no telling what I may chance on. He was far too elated to notice Daniel's silence. Is Rosh in danger? One of the boys asked. The yellow rat who was caught? Yellow, another boy objected. Do you know what the Romans do to a man? How long do you think you could keep quiet? There was an uncomfortable pause. This was a doubt they all faced in the night. In their own secret thoughts, they did not often speak of it. Don't worry about Rosh, Daniel assured them. The Romans have had a price on Rosh's head for years. It's another matter to lay a finger on him. Question broke out again. What would Rosh do with the money? Would he buy arms with it? Would he divide it among the farms? Maybe pay back for some of the sheep he had killed? There were so many needs for money. Daniel sat silent while they debated passionately the greatest needs for the stolen goods. Leave that to Rosh, he broke in finally. It is for the cause. The argument ended. They were perfectly satisfied looking at the circle of intense, swarthy faces, at the flashing eyes, feeling the unquestioning loyalty that bound them all to Rosh. Daniel cursed his own heavy misgivings. Why could he not be satisfied with his own answer? Nor were the villagers satisfied. Every day in the shop, in the marketplace, at the door of the synagogue, one heard the name of Rosh, sometimes brutally commanded, sometimes as hotly defended. At last, Rosh's name was on every lip, as he had once predicted. Some swore he was the defender of the Jews, but others pointed out that he had turned against Jews. But though they muttered, most men clung with blind faith to Rosh. They still looked to the mountain as the stronghold of freedom and hope. The relay of messages which had succeeded so well was now intensified. Joe threw himself into the role of fish peddler, and with experience he grew more shrewd in interpreting the bits of gossip, the signs of activity that he picked up in the doorways and kitchens of the city. Because he could not often leave home in the evening, other members of the band brought the messages to Daniel's shop. At night, Joktan crept down the slopes like a jackal across the cucumber field to the watchtower and back to Rosh with the day's report. A mounting excitement filled the watchtower where boys met nearly every night in the week. Here at last was something to do. Now they could see the results of their work. For the results were never far behind. Rosh had acquired at last the link with the city for which he had waited. The boys had given him a weapon he needed, and he struck far and wide. With suddenness and cunning, Joe learned of the Galilean merchant who was expected to deliver 7 crushes of oil to the centurion's household on the morrow. Though the merchant set out from his vineyard before dawn, neither he nor his oil was ever seen again. A bridegroom, son of the wealthiest elder in the synagogue, left the city with a gala party to his friends laden with gifts to claim his bride in Sepphoris. The bride waited in vain. Next day the whole party returned to their homes, clad only in their tunics, bereft of their handsome cloaks, their gifts, almost of their senses. A holiday party returning late by torchlight from the games in the theater of Tiberias was routed, stripped, and badly beaten. For none of these victims did the boys feel the slightest pity. Any trader who sold his goods to the Romans did so at his own risk. Those who flaunted their wealth or patronized a Roman theater were fair prey, and every crush of oil, every silver talent swelled the feud that would soon maintain the army of Israel. As Rosh grew bolder, caravans and travelers increased their protection. The mountain outlaws also suffered losses. 2 more men fell into Roman hands. 3 were secretly buried after night attacks, and 4 more nursed wounds in the cave. Rosh needed more recruits. Thus it came about that the boys were admitted at last into Rosh's active service, and came to see the action they had craved. Not the trained army that Daniel had dreamed of marching to confront Rosh, only a guerrilla force of 19 eager boys. They met at the watchtower, coming one by one, crawling on hands and knees through the tangled vines to wait on fire with impatience for a summons from Rosh. Throughout the village there was a sudden rash of badges. Boys limped with a swagger, leered smugly through purpled eyelids, and grinned through swollen lips. To harass the Romans was their real delight. A pilfered bit of Roman equipment, a spur, a leather gauntlet, was a prize worth risking one's neck for. One city boy who had made off with a helmet, even while a legionary who had laid it aside stooped to take a drink at the well, was almost as great as a hero as Joel himself. Much of all Daniel watched with dismay. It was not for this sort of skirmishing that he had dreamed of raising a band. To him, many of the exploits they boasted seemed childish. It had been his plan to wait, to train, to grow strong, and then to strike. This activity was like a fire lighted too soon. Would it burn itself out before the day had come? But even he was proud of the catapult. 2 boys brought word of it one evening, rushing into the shop out of breath. "Right on the road, there they've left it," one of them panted. "Only 2 guards. It's one of the big engines they had used in the siege of Sepphoris. A wheel crumpled and they've had to leave it there till morning." "I'll tell Rosh," said Daniel, laying down his hammer. "Wait, let's take care of this one ourselves," the other boy suggested. "What could Rosh do with a catapult? Come on, Daniel. We discovered this. Why can't we have some of the fun for ourselves? We can stuff it with oiled rags and set fire to it. What a bonfire that would make. Enough to be seen for miles," Daniel reminded him. "No use to burn good wood. We're in need of supplies, not bonfires." "We'll take it apart then," they decided. Before he could make up his mind, they had taken the lead out of his hands. The word went on. Hurriedly they scrambled together weapons, files from the shop, chisels and mallets, one at a time. By various routes they made their way to a point overlooking the Via Marias, and looked down at the monster that crouched there like an unearthly beast in the darkness. "What do you suppose they're moving that thing for?" someone whispered. I've a good idea," Daniel answered. "It's the kind of thing Herod used against the caves in Abrila. You think they dare to attack Rosh? If he makes enough trouble for them, all the more reason," said the boy. "We'll do away with it." "Wait," cautioned Daniel. "The guards are not to be killed. It would mean death in the village. I'll take one of them. Nathan takes the other, the way I've taught him." Before the guard knew that anyone was near, Daniel had one arm about his throat. When the man lay stunned and gagged, Daniel relieved him of sparing dagger. A moment later, a sharp whistle announced that the second guard also was overcome. One by one, shadowy figures crept from the rocks and surrounded the monster. They worked silently, muffling under their cloaks the rasp of the file and the chipping of the chisel. Bit by bit, plank by plank, the monster shrank and crumbled. Over and over during the long night, the boys retraced the devious path to the watchtower, staggering under heavy planks and cross beams. When the sun rose next morning, the catapult had disappeared without a trace. Nor did Roman offers of reward or threats of reprisal produce a single hint of its whereabouts. The boys were wild with success. They swaggered through the village, taking little pains to hide their barked shins and blistered palms. Daniel tried to warn them. "You will ruin everything," he urged. "This is only the beginning." "Why?" they demanded. "Why can't we strike now? Look at the people. Would one of them give us away? They are just waiting. One word and they'll be with us. Why doesn't Rosh give the word?" Joel sent warnings from the city. The Romans were strengthening their forces. A detachment of foot guard had come up from Tiberias to join the garrison. The road patrolled had been doubled. Even the village unfamiliar soldiers strolled, apparently without purpose, their eyes alert under their helmets. Daniel insisted there would be no nightly activity for a time. The boys, chafing under the restraint, were scowling about the village. There was an explosive quality in the air. One morning, a shepherd hurried into town with word that 3 of the town flock had been snared and slaughtered. That morning, 2 men visited Daniel's shop. "They say you can get a message to Rosh if you choose," one began. Daniel did not answer. "If you can, tell him this. He is to leave our sheep alone." "Do you begrudge a sheep now and then?" asked Daniel quietly, "to the man who would give his life for your freedom?" "We have had enough of his brand of freedom. He's free up there, free from the taxes that bleed us dry, free to play with the Romans while we stand and take the punishment. But by the prophets, if you have any fondness for this Savior of yours, warn him now. We have had enough." 2 days later, a farmer about to move with his family to man the watchtower in his field came upon his near-ripened crop and found it plundered, trampled, wantonly ruined. Dismayed, Daniel climbed the mountain to take the warning to Rosh, only to have Rosh laugh in his face. "They're afraid of their own shadow," Rosh jeered. "What good are they but to raise food for men who will fight?" "They're desperate," Daniel urged. "You know they cannot carry arms themselves. They are going to appeal to the centurion for protection. They want him to send legionaries." "Let them come," Rosh boasted. "Let them get a taste of the mountain. They will only break their teeth on it." Daniel went back to the village, sick at heart. "We must hurry," he thought with despair. "The whole village is turning against him. If the day does not come soon, they will never follow him." That's the end of 17. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you read 30 minutes every day. 30 minutes every day strengthens your reading skill. 20 minutes, it stays the same. Less than 20, it lessens. So I hope you're reading. All right. God bless you.